Hey everyone, so while I was doing the primary tier list, we went through all the Attrition Orbs classics, like AO, KT, Multi-Mock, everyone loves that thing, farms Iron Banner for that thing, and it got me thinking, what if there's a better Orb Gen primary that uses Attrition Orbs? Are there any special interactions with Attrition Orbs that might make it worth using on a different weapon that's not Multi-Mock, maybe even a special weapon? And so we've arrived at the subject of today's video. I wanted to investigate if there's any cool alternatives to our Attrition Orbs classics. So me and my chat, the thing about Attrition Orbs is kind of interesting. In theory, you should be able to mathematically calculate how long it takes to make an orb on every single weapon type. However, unfortunately, the data compendium's formula isn't exactly perfect. And so we just went and manually tested every single Attrition Orbs potentially good weapon under the sun. Weapons with small mag sizes, high fire rates, a lot of tick options, for example, like, caster swords that are potentially really, really good at making orbs quickly with Attrition Orbs. So we went through all of them. And so we also verified whether the formula was correct for a lot of these weapons. And so at the end of the video, I will introduce potentially a new formula that is a little bit more accurate when it comes to covering weapons at a blanket level for calculating how quickly an Attrition Orbs orb can be made. So first off, let's go ahead and look at primaries. So we have 3 families of weapons here. I don't really think it makes sense to compare like a caster sword to like an SMG. So let's go ahead and sort them by ammo type. So starting off, you might notice at the top here, we have DFA with explosive payload and Attrition Orbs. A lot of you guys have been pestering me to test this as part of the reason why I made this video actually. And you'll notice the TTO column here, time to orb, needs only 4 hits with a 140 RPM hand cannon to make an orb in 1.3 seconds. That's pretty fast. And you could argue that a hand cannon has a better overall, archetype, damage profile, whatever you want to call it, range value than an SMG. So if you're interested in maybe a weapon that makes orbs a little bit faster than Multi-Mock, even though it obviously doesn't have access to kinetic tremors, which is part of the appeal with Multi-Mock, DFA might be the weapon for you. We also have a couple other options here. Anonymous Autumn is one of the only sidearms. There's like a Heavy Burst, there's like Liminal Vigil, you have like a Precision sidearm and Insurmountable, but for the most part, you're looking at Anonymous Autumn. This is going to be the best frame when it comes to making orbs, and you could argue that an Attrition Orbs Volt Shot sidearm is more useful than an explosive payload Attrition Orbs, just hand cannon for general roam gameplay. So Anonymous Autumn also pretty good at 1.336 seconds to make an orb, and you'll notice that Multi-Mock here is sitting at 1.483 seconds, so we're talking about like tenths of a second here, but it is a small difference. Now, there's a couple other options here that are below Anonymous Autumn, DFA, our classic SMGs. And you'll notice explosive payload, like I mentioned, does help with DFA, but kinetic tremors, a lot of people know that it helps with Attrition Orbs. The 3 kinetic shockwaves, they help. But the thing is, kinetic tremors require so many hits that on good Attrition Orbs weapons, by the time you actually activate kinetic tremors, you're already most of, if not almost all of the way there to making your orb anyway. And the amount of hits that you get, realistically, is going to be maybe 2 shockwave procs that contribute to your Attrition Orbs, maybe just even 1. And so kinetic tremors, it's a good perk to pair with Attrition Orbs. It's just maybe like a little bit overrated. So the delay is a lot worse than something like explosive payload. So that's why maybe like a kinetic tremors Attrition Orbs hand cannon would not be nearly as quick at making orbs compared to something like a DFA. So generally here, the small mag sizes and the higher fire rate weapons, any sort of weapon frame that has a low time to dump its entire mag, just because a weapon has high fire rate doesn't mean its base mag size without any sort of mag perks is going to be, really low proportionally speaking. So there are some weapon families where even the fastest firing frame is not necessarily the best when it comes to producing orbs really quickly, because maybe the rapid fire frame or the highest fire rate frame has a really high base mag size compared to some of the other mag sizes in the family that are just really low proportionally speaking. Additionally, while a lot of perk combos have been explored by Bungie in this last Monument of Triumph update, there's still a lot of weapon perk combo options that we're still kind of left scratching our heads about when it comes to, Attrition Orbs plus Splash perk. There's just not that many primaries, for example, with Attrition Orbs, especially if we're talking about like sidearms, hand cannons, weapons like that, where maybe there would be some potential synergy if we had more roles like this in the future. Obviously, we're not getting any more. So potentially maybe even like a rapid fire sidearm with Attrition Orbs would be even better than Anonymous Autumn. But the reason why you don't see rapid sidearm here is because we literally don't have any rapid fire sidearms with Attrition Orbs. And so as a result, we only get the Anonymous Autumn at the top of the ranking here. But if you're wondering why there's some archetypes missing, it's because Bungie hasn't experimented yet, and never will, I guess, with putting some of these faster firing frames or like these lower mag dump frames and pairing them with Attrition Orbs. And then finally, a couple things with primaries. Scorching, Jolting, and Volatile perks don't work with Attrition Orbs. So Jolting feedback, the Jolt ticks do not count as weapon damage for Attrition Orbs procs. Burning Ambition, Incandescent, I believe. Burning Ambition, I know for sure doesn't count. Incandescent ticks, I believe that was patched as well quite early. So those don't contribute to Attrition Orbs. Otherwise, obviously, that would be very, very good synergy, and all the Scorch ticks from the Splash would give you a lot of Attrition Orbs procs. And then Volatile damage doesn't count as a weapon hit, so it's not going to contribute to Attrition Orbs either. The only thing that does contribute is Explosive Payload and Kinetic Tremors, which we've already discussed at length. And then finally, Support Auto. So the unfortunate thing with Support Auto when it comes to Attrition Orbs is that I discovered that it only counts the hits to damaged allies for the Attrition Orbs proc. So it actually procs fairly quickly. If you take a look here, it only takes 17 hits, which is a lot faster than a standard auto at 1.6 seconds. Unfortunately, it has to be a hit against a damaged ally. If you're just giving an ally a damage boost, for example, just the support auto frame boost, and you're not actually healing them, it doesn't count towards Attrition Orbs, which sucks. And hitting 17 hits in a row of healing on an ally is very difficult, because by the time you hit like even 5 on an ally, they're probably already full HP. And so as a result, it's, a little bit iffy. This number is not really reliable, but I still do recommend Attrition Orbs on some support autos because it's just free orbs. And a lot of the time on support autos, especially if you're already running Physic, the second perk can kind of just be whatever. Next up, we have the special weapons. Now, special weapons are a little bit underwhelming when it comes to Attrition Orbs. Obviously, in the past, before the nerf, weapons like VS Velocity Baton were making orbs like crazy. Unfortunately, now the amount of time it takes to make an orb with like an area denial on a single target at least is like 6 seconds. So it is still 1 per shot, but it's a very, very long time. Obviously, this time goes down significantly if you're hitting multiple targets. So if you hit like 2 targets with all 5 of the impact shots plus all the tick damage, you get like 3-second orb, which is a lot better, but still quite underwhelming given that, it's been nerfed quite a bit. An interesting pick, I suppose, is Attrition Orb's Explosive Payload Uzume, which is able to create an orb in 1.3 seconds. Unfortunately, I don't really recommend running a 4-mag Uzume RR4 with Explosive Payload and Attrition Orbs just to make an orb. That's a bit of an odd use case, so I'm not really going to recommend anything on this page except for one thing, and that's going to be Indebted Kindness. Indebted Kindness, even if you're shooting a single target with Attrition Orbs, still makes an orb in 1.9 seconds, which is fairly decent. And if you happen to hit multiple targets with your Rocket Sidearm Blast, which is fairly easy, Rocket Sidearms have, pretty good splash radius, then you'll make an orb even faster. So Indebted Kindness, shout out to that. It rolls like Air Trigger and Attrition Orbs, which I think is pretty good. If it rolled Attrition Orbs in the first column, that would be a bit nicer, but still pretty nice to have. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is Wildstyle. Wildstyle, in theory, nobody in my chat had an Attrition Orbs Wildstyle. And if you, for some reason, have a Season 23 Attrition Orbs Wildstyle, leave it in the comment. Leave it in the comment section below. I'm willing to bet that not a single player in this universe still has an Attrition Orbs Wildstyle. But if you have one, let me know. Let me know. Because in theory, it should trigger Attrition Orbs in 2 shots. And I think this thing also gets reconstruction in the first column. So you could, in theory, make an orb very quickly by shooting 2 double fire shots back to back. However, knowing Bungie and their unwillingness to stick to the formula of, GL hits and stuff like that, it's probably 3 shots. And if it's 3 shots, then this thing is like just pretty bad. But if you have a reconstruction Attrition Orbs, Wildstyle, in theory, it could make an orb very quickly. It could make an orb very quickly. So, that's all I have to say about that one. But nobody in my chat had one. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the power weapons. Okay, so power weapons here, there's a couple options. Pack Hunter does actually contribute to swords very significantly, which is kind of surprising because Pack Hunter doesn't really contribute to Relentless Strikes. And I would think that when they got rid of Pack Hunter contributing to Relentless Strikes, that they would get rid of it contributing to Attrition Orbs, but it doesn't. And so you can make an orb basically once a second with a Vortex Frame Sword if you're spamming heavy attacks. It makes, plenty of orbs. Same thing with casters, same thing with waves. Yeah, all the little wolf packs, their impacts all count towards Attrition Orbs, which is pretty nice. And swords already, by default, if you look at caster, just spamming 2 light, 1 heavy already makes orbs pretty quickly at 1.76 seconds. So pretty good. And then of course the wolf packs just take it to a whole nother level. The last 2 things I want to mention, obviously everyone knows Wolfsbane makes plenty of orbs, so I don't really need to talk about that. But rocket launchers, there is a precision rocket launcher with cluster bomb and Attrition Orbs. Now, you may know that wolf packs don't make Attrition Orbs when it comes to regular rocket wolf packs, right? So galley wolf packs, no. Sword wolf packs, yes. So unfortunately, all the little hits from the 8 wolf packs that you make from every single rocket don't contribute. What does contribute, though, is the sub-munitions from Cluster Bomb. And using this information, you can use an Ascendancy with Cluster Bomb and Attrition Orbs. And if you aim between like the legs of a boss, or you get the projectile like inside of a boss's hitbox, you can make 2 orbs per rocket shot, which is pretty cool. Does that mean you should use Cluster Bomb Ascendancy with Attrition Orbs? No. So I'm not going to recommend this at all, but it's cool. It's a cool interaction. And technically, if you're manually reloading this rocket, you can get, 2 orbs every rocket. That's like 1 orb every 1.242 seconds, which I suppose is not bad. But if you want orb spam, just use like a sword or something if you want to use a power weapon. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is GLs. So heavy GLs do not obey the mag percentage formula that is typically expected of weapons for Attrition Orbs. And so, for example, a 5 mag Tarnation requires all 5 hits to produce an orb, which is horrible. I was kind of potentially looking at cooking a strat where you use like Attrition Orbs, Explosive Light, Sticky Tarnation with like a bunch of people, and then you'd have like full sticky EL uptime. Unfortunately, the fact that it requires a full mag to make 1 orb is pretty pathetic. So kind of sad about that. Everything else here is to be expected. I suppose Bitter End, which is kind of interesting. Something I do want to mention is that heat weapons disobey the formula for mag percentage for attrition orbs. So normally the way attrition orbs works is that a certain amount of your mag, a certain percentage of your mag needs to be hit in order to produce an orb. Heat weapons don't have like a standard mag stat. They don't have a standard mag. And so instead of being like, okay, 55% of your total heat capacity needs to be hit in order to get an orb, they just have like a set number of hits. And so for a machine gun, 27 hits out of 101 mag, that's pretty decent. So there's a lot of other heat weapons that you may have noticed in the previous pages. For example, like, heat SMG, for example, like the Fast Talker. It just doesn't obey the mag percentage rule. And so typically that doesn't really result in a vastly different amount of hits required percentage-wise compared to like a standard SMG. But for some reason, LMGs have like terrible attrition orbs normally, but Bitter End is not bad. 1.7 seconds for a machine gun to create an orb. That's not that terrible. So that's about it for power weapons. And now let's go to the conclusion of this video, which is what are the notable weapons with attrition orbs where the contents of this video, what you've learned from this video, may change your judgment on, maybe give some weapons a second chance, right? So I'm going to list a couple. Number one is Attrition Orbs Volshot Anonymous Autumn. We have confirmation now. This thing makes orbs faster than Multimach. And you could argue that a sidearm has a better damage profile than an SMG, easier to control the recoil, etc., etc. So if you like sidearms, check out Attrition Orbs Volshot Anonymous Autumn. Knowers already been knowing, but if you don't know, try it out. Attrition Orbs Explosive Payload DFA. I'm not necessarily the biggest recommender of this weapon because, losing kinetic tremors in order to have explosive payload on DFA. I do think kinetic tremors is obviously better than explosive payload for just splash, generally speaking. And the time difference between making, the orbs between the two is not that big. So it's kind of up to you. You can also make 2 orbs per mag with DFA. So that is something of note, I suppose. Whereas Multimach, I believe it's only 1, even if you're like reloading over and over. So it's kind of something to note, I guess. This does change, I suppose, some SMG offerings as well. For example, like Bug Out Bag can make an orb faster than Multimach. Unforgiven can make an orb faster than Multimach because they're both frames that have smaller mag sizes and similar RPMs compared to a lightweight. So, you can run Attrition D-Stab on Bug Out Bag. You can run like Attrition Chaos on Unforgiven. All pretty good with the Void Sandbox right now. I mentioned earlier Air Trigger and Attrition Orbs Indebted Kindness. That one's pretty good. So, if you want to try out a Rocket Sidearm with Attrition Orbs, I think that one's pretty decent. Obviously, you have no splash perk, but still pretty decent. And then Area Denials are still decent, if you're hitting multiple targets, that's still a relevant Attrition Orbs use case. And then, of course, Swords. We talked about Swords already. And the last thing I want to mention is a new proposed formula for weapons when it comes to Attrition Orbs. So obviously, this doesn't apply if you have Explosive Payload or Pack Hunter or Kinetic Tremors or if you're a special weapon type like a Sword. But for standard weapons like an SMG or a Scout Rifle or anything like that, there is a formula that is a lot more accurate than what we currently have. So Compendium used to have written 55% of your mag plus 1 rounded down. And then Spider proposed 57% of your mag plus 1 rounded down. Now, the formula that I found to be the most accurate, now maybe there's an adjustment that you can make to this that will cover some of the edge cases, but the formula that I found to be the most accurate is 55% of your mag plus 2 rounded down. And if you see here, if we test that theory with the actual hit counts required from people that have literally measured this, it is mostly accurate, right? If you look at these 2 columns, they're basically the same. And some of them are like 1 off, right? So you have like Auto Rifle Rapid, 28 hits instead of 29, Machine Gun Rapids, 42 instead of 43, right? So besides that, fairly accurate. These are all almost 1-to-1. And so Compendium guy, if you're watching, you should change it to 55% plus 2 rounded down and say that there's some exceptions because I don't know how to fix the formula to make it work for the exceptions. Okay, so I'm being told that the original formula 3 iterations ago was actually 55% plus 2 rounded down. So we're going full cycle. And Compendium is now going back to the original version of the formula, which is apparently now correct, or mostly correct, 99% correct. Obviously, for a bunch of these weapons, doesn't apply because they're non-standard weapons. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you learned something about Attrition Orbs. And maybe you'll give some weapons a second chance that have Attrition Orbs that maybe you didn't think of using before. We're going to be doing lots of ability testing. We're going to have the shopping list video out pretty soon. I'm just going to put this one out because it's like a short one. And, a little freebie out there because I thought it was an interesting topic. Somebody asked me to test it. A lot of you guys have been asking me to test like DFA and stuff. So here's the data. I will link it in the description as well. I now have a Destiny 2 Attrition Orb spreadsheet. I can't believe I have an Attrition Orb spreadsheet, but now I have one. Okay. Anyways, goodbye.